Hello and welcome along. So today we're going to look at the origins of the Mechanicum, or the Adeptus Mechanicus as they are currently known. So the Mechanicum are an integral part of the Imperium and probably one of the most important subdivisions within the Imperium. And their history goes right back to the Age of Strife. So this is a time around 5,000 years before the Great Crusade. So that works out to be the 25th millennium through to the 30th millennium, which is when the Great Crusade starts. During this period, also known as Old Night, so this period is instrumental in the creation of the Imperium because it was the events of this period which were so terrible that led to humanity's fall from grace. So before this period, in the Age of Technology, also known as the Golden Age of Technology or the Dark Age of Technology, humanity had spread across this galaxy and had developed a level of technology that was incredibly impressive. They were able to do almost anything you can imagine. And really, they were only surpassed by the Elder at their height or the Old Ones. So humanity was living in a somewhat of a utopia. Their technology was extremely capable. Their society was well developed. And with this incredibly high level of technology, they had essentially become the masters of the galaxy, not the universe. And they were living the dream. But this wouldn't last, of course, because, as we know, that is not the state of the 40k universe now. Although this period lasted a very long time, something like 25,000 years, eventually the Age of Strife would begin. And this 5,000 year period was the complete opposite of that. So terrible disasters occurred. In no particular order, there was a machine uprising. The AI that humanity had developed got out of control, rose up. The details of who exactly is at fault and how it happened, why the AI rose up, etc., are somewhat blurry. Are they just intrinsically evil, which is the current mainstream imperial opinion on AI, or was it more nuanced than that? Probably. But either way, AI and humanity fought some enormous war, which led to huge destruction. And also during this time, warp storms erupted across the galaxy, making it much harder, in fact, almost impossible to travel long distances between the stars. So the many human colonies that had developed across the galaxy were now isolated, which led to them being more vulnerable to attack. And so, of course, the Xenos, being sneaky bastards as they are, started attacking humanity at the same time. So you've got all sorts of aliens coming out of the shadows and attacking humanity. You've got these rebel AI to deal with, and there's no joined up strategy, no communication, because the warp is going crazy. Even warp possessions, warp corruption is occurring on isolated worlds and so on. So no particular organization or person can try and solve this issue. Essentially, it's every world for themselves. And over time, this leads to humanity turning on itself. So on these worlds where a disaster has struck, their society is crumbling, their economy's collapsed, they fall back into a barbarian society. They start killing each other relentlessly to fight over the last remaining resources that might be available. They even resort to cannibalism on a widespread scale. And so everything that humanity had, this glorious utopia across the stars, has collapsed. And that includes Terra. So Terra during this period suffers enormous upheaval and complete societal collapse and extensive wars. And because we're talking about a 5,000 year period, we're not talking about a long war. It's just many, many cycles of destruction and slight rebuilds and then massive wars and then slight rebuilds and massive wars. So the destruction is happening continuously and cyclically over and over again. Every time humanity thinks it might even be slightly getting back on its feet, massive wars occur and they beat themselves back down into a primitive state. And so the advanced technology that humanity had is also largely lost. And even the people that knew how to use it are lost. So it reaches the point where this higher level of technology that was created, it still exists in some places, but it's damaged, it's malfunctioning, it's hidden away, it's not available to the average person on these human worlds. But on Mars, things are slightly different. So on Mars, a small group of people who appreciate just how valuable knowledge is to humanity's future, to getting humanity back on its feet, go out of their way to try and find these scraps of hidden technology or hidden knowledge that will allow them to rebuild the glories of the past. At first, these are small groups of people, individuals, roaming the surface of Mars, trying to find any scrap of information that they can. And when they do, they protect it, not just physically. They also realize that technology is not just about the physical object. It's about the knowledge around that, how to create it and how to use it. They start to record this and they protect that knowledge just as jealously as they protect the physical artifacts. Over time, by doing this, they gain a level of prosperity and success that others see. They're using this technology to defend themselves, to create food and things like this. So people start to gravitate towards them and admire what they're doing. But also what happens is they start to be seen in a religious context. And so they start to take on the role of a priesthood because they're the ones who have access to this secret knowledge and they protect it, and they protect it from any form of change as well. So to stop it from being corrupted, from being recorded inaccurately or mistakenly, they vigorously protect its integrity. But this becomes to the point where you can't actually invent anything because your invention is indistinguishable from an attempt to corrupt or misinterpret the original knowledge. They become more and more like priests until eventually they found an organization, the cult Mechanicus, which is a fully fledged religious organization. And these people become the priests of that organization, and they become known as tech priests. So you have the first tech priest, the cult Mechanicum, which is their religious code, their religious ideology. And over time, they become powerful enough to defeat the various rivals on Mars who disagreed with the way that they were doing things. And they become a big enough organization to actually create their own government. And this is what they call the Mechanicum. The more senior members of the organization become a kind of council of tech priests who rule the Mechanicum. And from amongst these senior tech priests, they select a supreme leader who they will call the Fabricator General. And there you have the kind of the foundation of the structure of the Mechanicum that would go on all the way through to 30k, and actually, with a little bit of adjustments during the heresy, become Adeptus Mechanicum and would last all the way through to 40k. So although they've established some level of order on Mars, they've managed to bring together as much knowledge as they can. They've managed to protect this ancient knowledge. They've got this stable-ish sort of form of government and this religion that is binding them together as a society. They are still beset by enemies. One of the biggest enemies they face at this time is the Psychonivora. These are some kind of giant robotic creatures, products of a group of heretic humans who build giant robotic creatures that they use to fight the Mechanicum. There's essentially almost no information about these Mechrites and their Psychonivora. Exactly who they were, why they were doing what they were doing, is all lost to history. But we do know that they were a major threat to the early Mechanicum, and the Mechanicum had to fight to survive. And this is when they produced the first Titan legions. So they created 3 Titan legions or orders, which lasted all the way through to the present day. And these 3 Titan legions were able to defeat the Psychonivora. And that's essentially what they were created to do, what Titans were created to do. They needed to be this big, this powerful, to carry in such enormously powerful weapons to destroy these robotic creatures that had been created by the Mechrites, and which nothing else they had could really do the job properly. And they did this really well. So the Titan legions themselves come out of this period and owe their creation to being a solution to these Psychonivora. So now equipped with Titans, they had successfully defeated their latest enemy. They quickly turned on each other. And this is a theme that you see within the history of the Imperium as a whole, but particularly with the history of the Mechanicum, as constant reversion to factionalism. Anytime there's a period of stability, they turn on each other. So the more powerful tech priests, although they technically owe allegiance to the fabricated general, they always think that they should be fabricated general, or they want to do something that they're not allowed to do, etc. And they turn on each other on a regular basis. You need to really think of each of these tech priests, these more powerful tech priests who control whole forged cities on Mars, as being their own petty warlords, and who, in principle, are loyal to the fabricated general, but can betray him at any moment, essentially. And now with their titans, they use their titans as well to fight each other. So the Titan legions have a history of fighting each other just as much as the wider Mechanicum does. But at times, there are more stable periods. During these times, they start to think, well, we should really get back out into the stars, So although there is still extensive warp storms, and traveling through the warp is very hard, very dangerous, they decide that they're going to do it anyway. So they build huge ark to go out and recolonize the galaxy in the name of the machine god. So they build these ships, fill them up with colonists and technology, send them off, and they have a very, very low success rate. Many of them are destroyed in the warp. Many others will be destroyed by the various Xenos that are out there just waiting for some easy prey, and others simply just disappear. No one ever knows what happens. But a small number do somehow miraculously make their way through all the warp storms, all the Xenos, and find habitable planets where they can settle. Now, because of the problems with the warp, they don't have great communication, or really any communication, with Mars once they've got a certain distance away. And so they are left to grow completely independently, to evolve their own society and their distinct culture on these various colony planets. They still hold strongly to the cult Mechanicum, which binds them together in some way with Mars. And so when eventually humanity does spread back out into the stars as part of the Imperium, they're still recognizable as Mechanicum colonies rather than just generic human colonies that need to be brought back into the fold. Now, as they reached the end of the Age of Strife and the warp storms started to calm down, the Emperor was starting to rise to power on Terra. And the Mechanicum had been watching what was going on in Terra for a while. They were aware of the Emperor, and they could see that he was growing in power, and they could see that he was a master of technology like they were. They admired his mastery of technology, and they coveted it as well. They had actually had a tradition of raiding Terra for lost technology as well, because Terra did have a lot of hidden and lost technology that was very valuable to them. But as the Emperor grew in power, they had to stop doing that because they would become into conflict with him, which would be too risky. And eventually the Emperor managed to, of course, unite Earth during the Unification Wars. And at this point, with his conquest of Luna as well, really Mars was the next logical step. So both sides had to look at each other and say, are we going to go to war, or are we going to do something else? If you think about the history of the Emperor or the history of Mechanicum, the most likely event would be they would just fight each other, because they're both very militaristic, both have extremely strong views on the way humanity should be, the nature of reality, and so on. So the Emperor obviously is trying to spread the imperial truth amongst humanity, and is trying to unite humanity as one under the imperial truth. The Mechanicum believe in the machine god and the cult Mechanicum, and are trying to spread that idea amongst humanity, and they believe that their idea is the way to bring about humanity's full potential, and the Emperor believes his way is right. So they're completely in conflict with each other. However, they both recognize that either side are extremely advanced technologically compared to their other adversaries, are extremely powerful, and would also make a great ally if they could just come to some kind of agreement. And so that's what they do. There is some internal fighting on Mars because some of the more powerful members of the Mechanicum, higher-ranking tech priests, do disagree with the alliance with Terra, but the majority are on board. And so after some internal scuffling, maybe a small-scale civil war, the Mechanicum and Terra unite as allies. Now, it's important to state they are allies. The Mechanicum is not absorbed into the Imperium. The Mechanicum don't serve the Emperor as such. They agree to do what's in the best interests of both parties. And although they managed to justify this by calling the Emperor the Omnisire, so associating him with the machine god, this isn't universal amongst members of the cult Mechanicum or the leadership of the Mechanicum. It's really, in many ways, a belief of convenience to allow the two very diametrically opposed belief systems to coexist. And so now the Mechanicum and the Imperium together can head off into the stars, where the Emperor can achieve his goals much more quickly with the help of the Mechanicum, because of the technology they preserved on Mars, the resources they have available, and the military assets they have available, particularly their Titan legions, which are an incredibly powerful force to add to his already incredibly powerful forces, particularly with his Space Marine legions. The Mechanicum also have large dockyards, of course, where they produce fleets. They can produce huge numbers of ships, at least as many and as good as the shipyards on Terra can produce. And so it's a huge boost to the speed at which the Great Crusade can occur. And so the Emperor, being pragmatic, realizes that this is the best option, the alliance with Mars, and not to go to war with them, conquer them, force them to adopt the imperial truth. And by which time they'd have expended so much resources on either side, both Terra and Mars would then be easy prey for the next Xeno that turned up in the solar system. And that is how the Mechanicum of the Great Crusade has come into being. It's now integrated into the Imperium as the key ally, and is hand in hand in the Great Crusade. And as the fleets go out into the galaxy, conquer these lost human worlds, the Mechanicum is able to find its own lost colonies and reincorporate them into the Mechanicum. So these worlds become known as Forge worlds. They become important worlds within the hierarchy of the Mechanicum itself, and they answer to the Mechanicum first, not to the Emperor. So they are, in theory, followers of the Emperor through the Mechanicum. They don't directly answer to the Emperor. And that's the level of power the Mechanicum has at this time. That's how separate it is from the rest of the imperial structures. Of course, they also find other worlds which are technologically still quite advanced and have useful technology to be incorporated back into the Imperium, or into the Mechanicum, really. And they take over these worlds as well, and those worlds become new Mechanicum worlds rather than imperial worlds. By putting their tech priests onto these worlds, they can spread the cult Mechanicus and turn them into true Forge worlds over time. And by doing that, they're increasing their own power, but of course, because of the alliance with Terra, they're also increasing the resources and power of the Imperium as a whole. Now, of course, eventually, the Horus heresy will occur. And the Mechanicum largely sides with Horus. There's an internal struggle, a revolution, another civil war in the Mechanicum, which, these are happening all the time. And the winners favour Horus because, of course, he's going to back them, whereas the Emperor was backing the status quo, the in situ leaders. Again, it's really a relationship of convenience to back Horus, but it is one that allows them to take control of the Mechanicum, largely. Of course, there are still elements of the Mechanicum on Terra which are loyal to the Emperor, and various planets around the galaxy that remain loyal to the loyalist parts of the Mechanicum. And so the split within the Imperium is mirrored within the Mechanicum, but it is more Horus favouring in general than the general Imperial split. And one of the main reasons that joining Horus is attractive to these rebels within the Mechanicum is that he is basically taking all the restrictions off. He's basically saying, do whatever you want. You can have access to all this restricted taboo technology, and you can do almost anything, essentially. Whatever you can imagine you can do. And this was very tightly controlled before by the leadership of the Mechanicum, who didn't want people straying into heretical practices, but that could lead them back to the problems that caused the Age of Strife. So the big fear, of course, is AI. They're very worried about AI rebelling and overtaking humanity again. So there's a very strict controls over that. But there's all sorts of strict controls, that some of which actually make sense and some of them don't make sense and have held the Mechanicum back. But many of the restrictions that are taken off by Horus are very attractive to these tech priests who just want to experiment and try new things and try out all these hidden, forbidden technologies. And so that is the formation of the Mechanicum. It would eventually be changed to the Adeptus Mechanicus during the heresy, when it becomes fully integrated into the Imperium. Rather than an ally, it's now an integral part of the Imperium with its own Adeptus, which means that they get a seat on the Council of Terror and they get to vote in things. But it also means they lose some of their independence as well. So essentially, they have to do what the Imperium tells them now because they're part of the Imperium. But how they do it is fully up to them because they have this seat on the Council of Terror. And that is seen as a reasonable compromise by the loyalist elements of the Mechanicum. When you look at the history of the Mechanicum, obviously there is an enormous benefit to them being incorporated into the Imperium as they were, in terms of their technology, their resources, etc. But you can also see they bring a lot of problems with them. They bring this religious baggage, which the Emperor really didn't want. And he has to accept, because to try and force them to give it up would essentially require destroying them, and then he would lose all that technology and resources he wanted to incorporate into his own forces. So he was in a very difficult situation. So perhaps he made the only choice he could in incorporating the Mechanicum into the Imperium as this ally, this independent ally who could have its own religious structure that went completely against his own teachings. But in many ways, it does feel like it was doomed to fail, because you make this huge exception right at the beginning of the Great Crusade. It does send the wrong signals to everybody else that actually you don't really need to follow the imperial truth if you're important enough, or if you're powerful enough militarily, you can do what you want. If you can bring a Titan Legion to play, then we'll let you get away with pretty much anything. And maybe that plays into the fact that so many imperial worlds rebel at various times throughout the history of the Imperium, and even of course the legions themselves rebelling. In some ways, it's sending that signal to the likes of Horus. Actually, if you're powerful enough, you don't need to follow the rules. I mean, looking at Lorgar, of course, with his persistence at emperor worship, even though it went against the imperial truth. When he's there thinking, well, actually, am I this wrong when the cult Mechanicus are essentially doing emperor worship? They call you the Omniscire, or they think of you as the machine god. They're allowed to do it, so I should probably be able to do it. And if they're right, then technically I'm right as well. So you can see where making these big exceptions out of convenience does lead to more and more problems building up within the Imperium, within the structure and the society of the Imperium, and within the character of the Primarchs and other senior, powerful leaders and nobles within the Imperium, who all want to just do things their own way and be the exception that the Emperor will allow just because they're powerful enough. Anyway, there you go. So let me know what you think about the Mechanicum in the comments. I will be doing future videos about specific parts of the Mechanicum, particularly the military parts, like the Legio Cybernetica, the Titan Legions, the Knight households, etc. But they'll be covered in more detail in separate videos. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I will see you next time.